Life has a funny way of revealing the truth about people, especially when there's money involved. I never thought my own sister would try to legally declare me dead, but I guess $12 million can make people do crazy things. I'm Emma Chen, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was raised by my mom, Lisa Chen, after my father supposedly abandoned us before I was born. My half-sister, Rachel, came along when Mom remarried Jack Wilson when I was 4. We grew up in a modest home in Boston, and while we weren't poor, Mom always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. What none of us knew was that my biological father, David Thompson, had been searching for us for years. Mom had disappeared while pregnant with me, thinking she was protecting us from what she believed was his controlling family. The truth, as I would later learn, was far more complicated. But let me start with the day everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years building my photography career, traveling to remote corners of the world capturing images for National Geographic and other major publications. My latest assignment took me to the Himalayan mountains, documenting traditional villages that were adapting to climate change. It was challenging work, no reliable phone service, spotty internet at best, and days of hiking between locations. Rachel had always been jealous of my glamorous career, though she never understood the countless nights I spent sleeping on frozen ground or the years of unpaid internships it took to get here. She chose a different path, working as a real estate agent and marrying Tom, a struggling day trader with expensive tastes. The last time I spoke to Mom was 3 months into my assignment. She sounded strange on our satellite phone call, emotional but trying to hide it. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. "There's something important I need to tell you when you get back. Something about your father." "Mom, you're breaking up," I replied, struggling to hear her through the static. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, just come home soon. I love you." Those were her last words to me. 2 weeks later, while I was in a remote village with no communication, Mom had a sudden heart attack. By the time I made it back to civilization and checked my messages, she had been gone for 10 days. I immediately began the long journey home, but travel from remote Nepal isn't simple. Delayed flights, missed connections, and monsoon weather stretched my return into a 3-week ordeal. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already set her plan in motion. You see, 6 months before Mom's death, she'd received a letter from a prestigious law firm. My biological father, David Thompson, had finally tracked us down. He was a federal judge now and had never stopped looking for us. More importantly, he'd recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to make things right. He'd set up a trust fund for me, $12 million, plus properties in 3 states. Mom had been processing this information, trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about my father when she passed away. Rachel found the letter while going through Mom's papers. And that's when she saw her opportunity. While I was desperately trying to get home, Rachel was convincing everyone that I had died in a hiking accident in Nepal. She used her real estate connections to create false documentation, took advantage of the language barrier and poor communication with local authorities, and even held a memorial service with an empty casket. My poor sister, she'd sobbed to the mourners. At least she died doing what she loved. By the time I finally made it back to Boston, Rachel had already filed papers to claim the inheritance as my only surviving sibling. She even moved into one of the properties left in the trust. I'll never forget the moment I walked into my childhood home. Rachel was sitting in the living room with Tom, surrounded by papers from the law firm, when I opened the door with my key. The color drained from her face as if she'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. Emma," she stammered, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mom had been so proud of. You're supposed to be dead." I finished for her, setting down my weathered backpack. "Funny thing about that, I'm very much alive." Tom bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rachel's shock quickly turned to calculation. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this. "Emma, thank God." She jumped up, arms open for a hug I didn't return. "We thought there was a report from Naples. We were devastated. I've been trying to handle all the legal matters for you to protect your interests." "Really?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails I discovered on Mom's computer. "Is that why you told the law firm I died in a climbing accident?" Why you've been trying to claim my inheritance? I can explain, she sputtered. It's not what you think. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd spent the flight home doing my research, making calls, and uncovering every detail of her scheme. What I discovered wasn't just fraud, it was a calculated plan that had started even before Mom's death. What Rachel didn't know, what none of us had known, was that I wasn't the only one who had inherited my biological father's methodical nature and attention to detail, and I was about to show my dear sister exactly what that meant. Pack your bags, I said calmly, pulling out a formal-looking document. You have 24 hours to vacate this property, and Rachel, don't bother trying to run. The FBI is already investigating the false death reports you filed. She lunged for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family's interests. I smiled, thinking of the meeting I had scheduled for the next morning. Actually, I can prove everything. And you're about to learn exactly who you've been trying to steal from. What happened next would shake our family to its core, expose decades of secrets, and lead to a courtroom confrontation that nobody saw coming. But that's where the real story begins. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Rachel had spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lawyer willing to defend her misunderstanding. She'd even tried convincing our stepdad, Jack, to reason with me. Emma, please, he'd begged over the phone. Rachel made a mistake, but she's still your sister. No, Jack, I'd replied firmly. A mistake is accidentally damaging someone's car. She tried to legally declare me dead. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Judge David Thompson's office. When I couldn't reach Mom during my trip, I finally opened that email I'd been avoiding. The one from the law firm explaining my father's search for me. After confirming Mom's death, I'd reached out to them. The security guard at the courthouse entrance did a double take when he checked my ID. Miss Chen, or should I say Miss Thompson, he said with a knowing smile. You look just like your father. I was directed to a private chamber where a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stood looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like looking at an older, male version of myself. We had the same sharp green eyes, the same way of tilting our heads when studying something. Emma, he breathed, taking a step forward but stopping himself. I've waited so long. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't you find us sooner? I tried. God, I tried. He sank into a leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. Your mother. Lisa was trying to protect you. My family back then. My father, he was a controlling man. Lisa thought he'd try to take you away from her, raise you as the proper Thompson here. She didn't know he was dying, that things were about to change. For the next hour, he filled in the gaps of my history. How he'd hired private investigators, how he'd finally reformed his family's old money attitudes as he rose through the legal ranks, how finding that first photo of me in National Geographic had given him hope. When I got sick, he continued, I knew I had to move faster. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about giving you the security I should have provided all along. A knock at the door interrupted us. Judge Thompson. They're ready. He squeezed my hand. Ready to face your sister. I nodded. More than ready. The courtroom was packed. News of a federal judge's long-lost daughter and attempted inheritance fraud had spread quickly. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, wearing her most modest black dress, clearly going for a grieving sister image. Her expensive lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then my father took the bench and everything changed. Rachel's face went from practiced sorrow to shock as she looked between Judge Thompson and me, finally seeing the obvious resemblance. Her lawyer's whispers became more frantic. This emergency hearing will address the fraudulent death declaration of Emma Chen, also known as Emma Thompson, and the attempted theft of her inheritance through false documentation. My father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Rachel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself due to obvious conflict of interest. Already arranged, my father replied calmly. Judge Martinez will be here momentarily to proceed. I simply wanted to be present for this opening statement. He turned to Rachel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Ms. Wilson, when you attempted to have your sister declared dead, did you ever wonder why a federal judge would leave such a substantial inheritance to a photographer he never met? Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. I didn't. No, you didn't think, he continued. You saw an opportunity and took it, never questioning why I would track down your sister after 29 years. Never wondering why we have the same eyes, the same expressions. Never considering that I tried to steal from her. You were attempting to defraud a federal judge's daughter. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Martinez arrived and the real proceedings began. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had forged documents, bribed officials in Nepal, and even created fake death certificates. She'd planned it all while Mom was still alive, waiting for an opportunity. But the biggest shock came when Tom, Rachel's husband, took the stand. She started planning it months ago, he testified, avoiding Rachel's murderous glare. When she found out about Emma's real father being Judge Thompson, she became obsessed. Said it wasn't fair that Emma got everything just for being born to the right father. She even suggested we should adopt Emma's future share of Mom's estate since dead people can't inherit. I watched my sister crumble as her husband betrayed her, as her schemes were exposed one by one. The woman who'd once been my childhood playmate, who borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets, was revealed as a stranger. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. Rachel was facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false reports. She'd have to repay all the money she'd spent from the properties she'd illegally occupied. Her real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. But it was our stepfather's words in the hallway afterward that truly ended things. Your mother, Jack said, tears in his eyes. She wanted to tell you about Judge Thompson for years. She was so proud of you, Emma. Rachel. She knew that. She knew and still chose to do this. I can't defend her anymore. Rachel was led away in handcuffs, sobbing not from remorse, but from being caught. As she passed me, she hissed, You think you're better than me now? With your fancy real father and millions? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt only pity. I was never competing with you, Rachel. You were the only one keeping score. The aftermath changed everything. Judge Thompson, Dad, and I began the slow process of building a relationship. He retired from the bench to focus on his health and making up for lost time. The treatments were working better than expected, giving us precious months to connect. I kept my photography career but established a foundation in Mom's name, providing scholarships for young photographers from underprivileged backgrounds. One of Dad's properties became a gallery showcasing their work. Rachel was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. Tom filed for divorce and cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. Jack visits her sometimes, but our family will never be the same. Last week, I found an old photo album in Mom's things. There was a picture of Rachel and me as kids, grinning with ice cream-covered faces, genuinely happy in each other's company. I thought about showing it to her during visiting hours, but decided against it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But other things, like my newfound relationship with my father, prove that it's never too late for a new beginning. Dad and I often sit in his study, sharing stories and making up for lost time. You know, he said recently, your mother was right to be worried about my family back then. But she was wrong about one thing. Running away didn't prevent you from becoming a Thompson. You've got our spirit, our sense of justice. I smiled, thinking of the long road that led us here. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And who am I? I'm Emma Chin Thompson, daughter of a mother who protected me and a father who never stopped searching. I'm a photographer who captures truth through my lens and a woman who learned that real family isn't about blood or money, it's about choice. As for Rachel, I heard she's writing a memoir in prison about family betrayal. I wish her well, but some stories don't need to be rewritten. Sometimes the truth is enough.